Hello and welcome back to the channel. Today we're playing Stockfish, but if it can sacrifice a rook, it must. Thank you to ReadBot1024 for leaving this idea in a comment. If you have any ideas you'd like me to try, feel free to comment them down below. My goal is to win one game. Let's get started with game number 1. Alright, game number 1, we do have the white pieces, and since Stockfish won't be able to move either of its rooks, it's basically like playing up 10 points of material. And while in the past I have defeated Stockfish up a queen, which is of course worth only 9 points, this is going to be a little bit different, since it's not just going to, give away its rook and allow me to take it, it's going to sacrifice the rook, hopefully for a pawn. So let's imagine that both of these rooks are sacked for 1 pawn each. That's already back down to 8 points of material, which is an advantage that I have not defeated Stockfish with in the past. And what I have to be extremely careful of is, you can imagine, say this bishop were on e6 and somehow this rook were to capture this pawn on a2, I'd have to be really careful of an instance like that, because were I to take on a2, the bishop would just take back and I wouldn't get any material at all. If that happens even once, then my material advantage is down to like 4 or 5 points, and that I will probably get destroyed in against the engine. We're met with pawn g6. Until that happens though, until we actually get into a middle game where there are open files and lines that we can play down, I don't think I have to actually overthink any of these moves. This is basically a normal game of chess. Until some pawns actually get traded off and the rooks come into play, I can basically imagine that I can play whatever and it won't be able to follow through. Say that, I don't know, I were to castle kingside, it wouldn't actually be able to follow through on the attack because these rooks would get sacrificed almost immediately. We are met with knight to h5, and now that I think about it, since I do have this sort of inconclusive material advantage that hasn't really manifested yet, I kind of want to trade off every other piece. So instead of playing bishop to g5, which is what I would normally do to instigate the opponent to weaken its kingside pawn structure, I'm actually just going to drop the bishop on e5 and try to get a trade. Okay, Stockfish turns it down with pawn to f6, so I'll drop the bishop back to g3 and at least leave it so that the knight could capture my bishop if it so pleased. We're met with pawn to e5, which is a little bit confusing, because I have 3 attackers on that pawn and it only has 2 defenders. Although I suppose my bishop is being attacked by the knight, so were I to take, pawn takes back, bishop takes? Why is that not just a free pawn for me? This is also interesting because upon recapturing with the f pawn, it would actually open up this line for the rook, which means that it would be able to sacrifice the rook for the knight, which again would only net me a 2-point material advantage, which I don't think I'd be very happy about. So I think I'm actually going to leave all the pawns on the board and just slide my knight back. If it does want to play e4, which would make a lot of sense, grabbing a lot of space, then I'll slide the bishop back, target the knight on h5, which obviously now is a bit of a moot point considering the knight has captured the bishop, but that was the original idea. Knight takes on g3. I'll go ahead and just take back. We are trading pieces. I did say that that was something that I wanted to do. We're met with bishop to e6. It is playing a very strange game, I'll admit. Not totally sure what sort of magic touch I added this game, but it is playing a very, it's almost as if it knows that it doesn't have the rooks to play with, but it doesn't. So it's just very strange from the engine so far. I could also, in this position, take on e5. It would have no choice but to take back and then sack the rook on f2. I would recapture with the king, which would make it a little bit weak, but I would also just be up a rook at that point. I don't know. It's going to have to sacrifice its rooks anyways, and I don't see this position getting more complicated for me anytime soon, so I'm just going to focus on development. We are met with knight to d7, maybe pawn to c4 at some point would be nice so we get some trades on the board. For instance, pawn pushes, pawn takes, bishop takes, pins the light squared bishop to the engine's king, meaning that no matter what happens next, we have to trade off those bishops. I think I actually quite like that. Let's go ahead and play c4 right now. Met with pawn to f5, it's playing super aggressively, which is throwing me off a little bit. Pawn to f5, I imagine, looks for e4. After these pawns get traded off, since d5 won't be a root support for that pawn on e4, the f5 pawn can serve that purpose instead. Now, why can't I just take and then play bishop c4 anyways? Because it's not like it's threatening anything down the long diagonal if it's pinned to the king in the first place. I guess I'd be dropping d4, right? Because there are 2 attackers on d4 and there would only be 1 defender. Arrows as precise as ever, but you get the idea. I could also just trade everything off, and as long as I don't get rock and rolled by its minor pieces, I should be actually totally okay. So I'm going to take here on d5. Bishop does take back. Now, I guess I do have to throw bishop c4 on the board, otherwise the bishop does take on g2 with tempo on the rook. I could also kingside castle. Oh, actually, that's exactly what I should be doing. I'm going to kingside castle, and even though I do lose a pawn here on d4, I don't think I actually care, because again, we've opened up the position in such a way that we can force a lot of these minor pieces to get traded off. The bishop takes here. I don't even care if it takes on b2. I'm going to play bishop to c4 and start forcing these trades onto the board. Knight comes up to e5. That's even better, I think, because now I can take and then follow up after the recapture with queen to b3, and now the queens also have to get off the board. board, which is so far pretty darn good. I would take with the knight, but then there's bishop takes b2, hits the rook, hits the knight, and then I lose material, so I do have to take back with the pawn. I'm going to lose this anyways, which I do, but after rook to a2, I hold on to everything, so this should be fine. Nice, and the bishop takes because the engine still thinks that it's winning, right, which it is correct, it is winning, but it doesn't realize that it's going to have to sacrifice the rooks any moment now, and there simply aren't that many pieces for it to sacrifice those rooks to. So I'm going to take this bishop back, and these rooks are basically as good as gone. We get knight to d3. It's also just occurred to me that I only have 4 of my 8 pawns left, which is still plenty, but I do at least need 2 pawns on the board at all times if I expect these rooks to be sacrificed for them. Met with knight to d3, I think I can just wait around here a tiny bit. I'm gonna play knight to f3. My ultimate goal is just to get it to threaten any of my pawns with its rooks, and then that's just free material. So that shouldn't be that difficult to do. We did bring one of the rooks out. I don't actually want to trade rooks, so maybe I should get off that file, go back to f1. Rook slides over. I might play like really suspiciously defensive, like maybe knight to h2, which in any other position is a horrible move, but what I'm basically doing is inviting it down to the second rank because now it's looking at that f2 pawn, and in just a moment it's going to have no choice but to sacrifice the rook for that pawn. We'll go ahead and just drop knight to f3 on the board and force it into that sacrifice. We do in fact get the sacrifice from the engine, and now we can pretty much simplify this and go directly into a completely winning endgame. So we'll go ahead and just take back the rook. No doubt the knight will take back. We will recapture with the king, and even though I suppose that was quote-unquote only a 3-point advantage, we are in an endgame where having an extra piece is a pretty significant thing. Not to mention the rook comes down to d3, which is basically like walking directly into a trap, because now I can just retreat the knight. It's only looking at pawns, so we'll have to choose which pawn to sack the rook for, and that should be a very easy simplification for the rest of the game. So we'll go ahead and just drop the knight back. Met with the rook capturing on g3, and now we can simply take back the rook and simplify the endgame. We did manage to successfully get one of the rooks to trade off, or rather both of the rooks to trade off for pawns, and by taking it into an endgame, this conversion is way easier because you can imagine, even if I did have this material advantage, but say in the starting position, Stockfish would probably, run circles around me with all of its different pieces and, eventually trick me. But since we're in such a simple endgame, this is more so about converting the position into a victory than, actually outplaying Stockfish in any real concrete sense. Okay, we're met with pawn to c6. No more shenanigans to calculate about sacrifices and tricking it into giving up rooks or anything. This is just a totally normal endgame, so I'm going to take my pieces pawn hunting. And eventually, once I clear off all of these pawns, well, it's actually doing, of course, a very good job of defending because it's Stockfish, but I'll go ahead and take all of these pawns. It's going to try and promote. And this is actually, I think, trickier than I'm giving it credit for. Let me bring my king. Okay, the question is, do I try and beat it to the punch by pushing this pawn and then just sacrifice my rook for whatever pawn it pushes, and then risk it, I don't know, being supported by a different pawn? Say I sack the rook, the pawn takes back, there's still promotion ideas. Or do I bring all of my forces over and just completely try to stop it from promoting before continuing with my own ideas? I just don't know if I'm fast enough. You know what, we're gonna walk the king over because I can't imagine that it's going to promote in time. Okay, it plays king to c3, so I don't think it even thinks that it has time to promote. Pawn comes down to c4, king to c5 gridlocks the entire position. Yeah, precisely. In that position with the king on c3, I don't know, had the pawn advanced to a5, b5 drops. Had this pawn advanced to b4, the pawn on c4 drops. So no matter what it does, we've basically gridlocked its queenside pawns. Obviously, besides those, it has nothing but the king left to work with. So we've basically managed to stop everything from, progressing in this position. We'll come down and target this pawn. It tries to get away, but we'll catch it. Catch this pawn on a6. b5 is the only thing left to go. For all I care, it can capture all of these pieces, but it doesn't. It spares me the pawn, so it also spares me the opportunity to deliver a very special type of checkmate. King goes back, and we'll go ahead and fast forward through forcing this onto the board. We do in fact get the queen promotion, and now all we have to do is walk that king all the way down to the end of the board. Found as a secondary diagram under the Krabby Patty formula in 2006, we do in fact get ladder's mate. With that, we do in fact defeat Gotham Fish. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you again so much to ReadBot1024 for leaving the original idea in the comment. If you guys have any ideas that you'd like me to try, feel free to comment them down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.